If you're a regular listener to our show, you're probably aware of the current budget crisis that the Ringwood School District is facing. At a Board of Education meeting on Thursday, March 14th, the district revealed a $1.8 million budget shortfall, which will lead to the elimination of 30 positions across the 4 Ringwood schools.
We want to begin this episode with an important caveat. We'll be discussing budgets, ratios, taxes, and things that can feel very hypothetical. But we want to take a moment to acknowledge the terrible reality that 30 people, members of our school community, are going to be losing their jobs. And regardless of the reason why, that's bad news. These people have bills to pay and families to support, and their loss of income, regardless of how necessary it may be, stings.
Right. So to all the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the students, the coworkers, and just really everybody that's going to be affected by these cuts, we want to offer, as best as we can, our sincere well wishes. We hope that this is a learning moment for Ringwood and that we can avoid such a catastrophic elimination of jobs in the future.
In terms of our goals for this episode, we're not looking to point fingers or assign blame just yet. There is a lot of blame going on right now. Just go on Facebook and look for some of it. And we feel that the best thing to do right now is to attempt to help ourselves and our listeners explain just how this happened. Not why it happened, but how it happened.
Right. Now, let's discuss what we know and what we don't know. And again, that one thing we ask of all of you is that just leave your preconceived beliefs and your preliminary blaming, leave that at the door, because this is not the time for anyone to go deeper or farther into their separate corners. We need to understand how this works.
At the meeting on the 14th, the current interim business administrator, Paul Roth, explained what a typical timeline for creating a budget looks like.
Right, and let's listen to him in his own words and take a clip from his presentation so you can understand.
As far as the calendar goes, typically in October, that's when the budget process starts. School districts in the fall start producing their applications for state school aid, district report on transported students, and a whole variety of other state reports. A lot of people view it as just a list of things to do, a compliance list, but it's actually very elegantly designed where that information helps you build the basis of your budget. For instance, how do you know what staffing you need if you don't know your student enrollment, right? It's just the basics that lead into it. So really, budgeting starts in October. Somewhere before the holidays, supervisors, department heads, principals, they're asked to start sending in their requests for supplies, software, whatever staffing needs or changes they see. And at the same time, we begin working on revenue projections. The reason why I have 2 items in bold is part of our revenue projections come from state aid, which we didn't receive until February 29th, and the audit report. Those 2 items this year came very late in the cycle. State aid always comes late in the cycle. So essentially all the pieces come into focus about 2 weeks before this presentation. So it's a very compressed timeline and usually very difficult to hold a variety of meetings and bring everyone up to speed in the best professional manner. It tends to be somewhat of a rushed process because of the timing of data coming in. After tonight, assuming that the board approves the preliminary budget, by March 20th, administration has to send the preliminary budget down to the county office. The county office represents the state of New Jersey. They review all the materials and make sure all legal requirements are met. And if all legal requirements are met, the state approves the budget and authorizes us then to advertise to schedule the tax levy hearing.
So a lot of moving parts here, but this is why having a business administrator is a critical part of this process.
Right. Now, as the meeting went on, he continued to summarize the budget process. And let's go back to his own words and take a look at his presentation.
Going into the budget process, it's actually pretty simple. Even though there's more numbers, it's similar to doing a budget at home. You figure out what your revenue is, and then you pretty much could only spend what you're getting in revenue. Many times, presentations gloss over revenue for school districts. I like to spend a lot of time on it because revenue is actually very much restricted on school districts, and it adds pressure, forcing, in many cases, downsizing. And a lot of people don't understand this, so I want to spend some time going through the numbers and explaining this tonight. While we're waiting for revenue numbers to come in, such as state aid and items from the audit, we also begin building what our anticipated expenditures are. All of our contractual obligations, such as contractual salaries, out-of-district tuition rates, and the state actually gives us the tuition rates to budget to. So while it seems like we have a lot of decisions, the information is actually fed to us and we have to use the information. And I'll detail that as we move forward. Finally, once you have both sides together, you compare them. If there's a difference, that's where the tough decisions come in, because expenditures always have to equal revenue. You can't spend more than the revenue coming in. And that's the part that makes budgets very restrictive that most people don't key in on. And unfortunately, that's a very real thing that Ringwood is running into. And from past history, you've had year-over-year state aid cuts, so I'm sure you're very familiar with that dialogue.
Bottom line here, you can't spend more than you're taking in. You can only raise taxes so much. By law, it is a maximum increase cap of approximately 2% plus healthcare cost increases. Ringwood is continuing to see declining enrollment of students, and that has a direct impact on how much state aid the schools receive. There are a whole host of other parameters and restrictions on how money is spent and where revenue comes from. And he goes into this in great detail.
Right, and we're going to include for you a link to the recording of this meeting as it's housed on the school's website, because there's a lot of great detail that he goes into, and it's more than we have time to go into in the short form of what our show is. But I've got to tell you, you will learn so much in that short period of time.
Absolutely. So let's get to the devastating details of the 2024-2025 proposed budget. Here are a few of the hardest details to swallow.
Right. So first, a reduction of 30 full-time employees, and that includes teachers, support staff, specialists, people who have a hand in Ringwood schools, people, if you have children in these schools, if you've been a student in our schools, these are people that you probably know, you probably have worked with, and unfortunately, we're losing about 30 of these folks.
The itemization presented at the meeting shows the details. Additionally, the costs associated with employment were presented as well.
Right, and things like supplies, textbooks, services. Unfortunately, we're taking a pretty sizable hit here as well.
We'd also see the loss of an administrator position in Ringwood.
Right. So it's not just about the teachers and support staff, etc. Somebody from an administration role is also going to lose their position as part of this proposed budget. Now, again, the actual presentation is quite detailed, and just as we encourage you to look at where the money is coming from, we also want you to look at that recording so you can see how the money is expected to be spent in the budget. So again, have a look and listen, because the details that are in there, much more than we have time to go into here, and they are absolutely something that you need to be aware of.
So as you can see, the business administrator takes all these complicated figures and shares them with the superintendent. The superintendent is the administrator hired by the Board of Education to be responsible for the operations of the school, and this includes the creation of a budget.
Right, so this tentative budget is then presented to the public and proposed to the Board of Ed, and that's what happened at the meeting on March 14th. It is here that there's an opportunity for discussion, for debate, and ultimately a vote to approve or to request changes be made by the superintendent before submitting the budget to the county and setting the ball in motion for it to be a matter of record and what we're going to be doing.
One thing that was not mentioned by the business administrator is that there's a budget committee of current Board of Education members called trustees that continuously keep an eye on current and projected concerns.
Right. Now, these committee assignments are made possible by and approved by the school board president. On an ongoing basis, these individuals are to present basically a state of the finances update to the board at each board meeting.
So over the next few months, we will continue to focus on discussing this monumentally important issue. Starting today, we know how it works. But as we dig deeper into the past few years, yes, years, budgets for these schools just don't happen overnight. It's a cumulative effect of decisions made in the past and not always by our own choices.
Right. We'll look at the budget committee assignments. We'll look at the recommendations that the superintendent has made over the years, and even the revolving door of business administrators that we've seen here in Ringwood. And we'll present all of what we find for all of you in Ringwood to consider and to discuss.
Now, we aren't looking to point fingers. There's enough of that happening right now. We're looking for how the hell did this happen? How the hell did so many miss this? And how the hell do we never let this happen again?
Right, because one thing's for certain. This is the time when we as Ringwood come together as a community. We've been discussing the distractions that many in our town have brought before the board, and we can't help but think, is this why our eyes were off the ball?
Remember the closet?
Which wasn't really a closet?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Now, remember, there were presentations about how drag queens were coming to read to our students, and that got a lot of oxygen in the room for quite a few months.
There were the slogans of the various Board of Education campaigns promising things like academics over politics or being for the kids.
And being fiscally responsible. Now, again, those campaign messages had those that ran that were elected behind them. We're going to look at that kind of thing.
There's also the math that was, you divide this total number by this and you multiply, you carry the 6. All the complicated math that was presented as absolute fact at board meetings, but maybe wasn't quite so factual.
Exactly. And in fact, if for those of you that have actually taken the time to listen to the meeting, we're going to dig into some of the things that the business administrator actually presented to absolutely debunk that simple mathematics. That's just not how schools work. But
stay tuned for that in the future.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot. And again, this is a time where we mourn. This is the time where we figure out how do we come together. And this is the time, how do we figure out how do we move forward? To all of our community members that are about to be impacted by this, our hearts are with you.